We are live.
Hey, everybody. It's Broadcast Team Alpha with the Sunday show on Wednesday. I am Nori Love, and I am graced with my co-host Aage Nost and Tom Schaefer, and we have a remarkable guest tonight. Are you just waving, Tom, or
I am waving.
Signaling? Oh, good. He's saying hello. We have a remarkable guest tonight with fascinating content and information. Aage, do you want to tell us about Greg Little? You're muted.
A lot of research that is extremely interesting. He has an MS in psychology and a doctorate in counseling and educational psychology. He's also an author and a co-author of over 60 books.
Wow.
God, that's a lot of writing. And he has been featured in 14 documentaries on the History Channel, History 2, Discovery Kids, Vision TV, BBC Television, and the Learning Channel, National Geographic, and Sci-Fi, MSNBC, and the Weather Channel. And let's see, I think I forgot one because I saw him on UFO TV. I saw the TV documentary he did on Atlantis, and it is phenomenal. And we're going to talk about this today because that is our subject. And also, since 1982, has been active in writing about the Native Americans' grave mounds and the spiritual practices of natives. And he also investigated many of the ancient cities in South and Central America, and is the author and the illustrator of the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Native American and Indian Mounds and Earthworks.
Wow.
And also Souls and Paths of Souls, I think it's called. And speaking of the mysterious symbols found on ancient mounds describing death rituals and what they thought the spirits were and where they went. So not anymore from me. You want to welcome to the show here, Greg.
Welcome, Greg.
Oh.
Yeah, I think you're still muted, Greg. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay.
Yes.
There
All right.
we go.
Well, thank you. Yes, I didn't want to make any noise during that. That was.
Thank
I
you.
don't know if I can live up to that or not. Rather profound. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and we started a bit late, but that's fine. Good to see you, Aage, and good to meet you other folks.
Absolutely.
We'll see where it goes.
Aboard, Greg.
Yeah, I've been around a long time in all this. I've tried to stay sort of low key and got a little too high key when we did all those documentaries and decided to quit doing those. It's just too much and too little in return. It burns up too much time. But anyway, okay.
So,
Good
Greg,
to be here.
yeah, so I'm so excited to talk with you because I lived in Virginia Beach for many years, and I know the Association for Research and Enlightenment, also known as the Edgar Cayce Center, right? And so I would love to know, tell us, how did you get involved with the Edgar Cayce Center, and how did it come about that you wrote the book, Edgar Cayce's Atlantis?
Well, I did. I was one of the co-authors of the book Edgar Cayce's Atlantis, along with John Van Auken and my wife, Laura. And I got involved in all this really when I was a graduate student in psychology back in the early 1970s. I'm not really sure how I found out about Cayce, but I was exceedingly interested in strange paranormal experiences people had. Particularly those that were really documented very well. And there are a lot of good documented cases. One of these that I stumbled on was Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce, when he was 13 years old in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, had a strange experience where he was visited by what is essentially an angel who appeared to him in the woods. The angel asked him what he would most like to do. And he thought very quickly and said, I guess I'd like to heal people and help people. And the angel said, it'll be yours. Well, that was really the start of Cayce's healing ability and his psychic ability. And so I read about this, and that got me researching some of the things that Cayce said, particularly his health readings. Now, Edgar Cayce did, he did about 22 or 23,000 what you could call psychic readings, but they're a little different from what most people think of a psychic reading. And out of those, the vast majority of them were for people's health ailments. And you have to put him into a perspective. He was born in 1877, not long after the Civil War. And medicine really hadn't come very far at that time. So Cayce's remedies were used for a variety of ailments. They have been studied by many, many physicians, lots published about it in scientific medical journals. In general, all of the articles have pretty much said that Cayce's accuracy rate was somewhere between 83 to 88%. That's the range. So I found that pretty remarkable. That, in turn, then got me looking at a few other things Cayce said. And then in roughly 1989 and 90, the Cayce organization asked me to look in a type of reading that Cayce had given about America's ancient past. And that was the Mound Builders. That got me into all of his ancient history. And that then led to everything else. And in 2003, we started a search for Atlantis, my wife and I did, going to many, many places, everywhere from Egypt to the Yucatan Peninsula to some really pretty remote and dangerous places. And then we basically spent 25 weeks in the Bahamas on boats using side scan sonar, underwater video, remote video, and looking for things to pretty much follow up Cayce. That led us to finding lots of crashed planes in the Bermuda Triangle, because that area of the Bahamas is the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. And it got the attention of lots of documentary makers. So we started working some with them. So that's kind of a thumbnail of it all. It really started in my professional interest in psychology.
Amazing. So where is Atlantis supposed to be? Ish?
Well, according to researchers, virtually every location on the face of the earth, somebody says was Atlantis, everywhere. Right. And you can read that all the time. Every few weeks, you'll read an article that Atlantis was here, it was there. Most of the mainstream believes that Atlantis was in the Mediterranean, which is exactly where Plato said it was not. But they say it was the island of Thera. But Plato, the story starts with Plato. Plato was very specific about where Atlantis was. And Plato said it was an empire of many islands. It had one very large island. He said that you had to go out through the Pillars of Hercules, out of the Mediterranean. Pillars of Hercules in the Strait of Gibraltar. And then he said it was far across the Atlantic, which is the true ocean. And you could hop from island to island till you reached an opposite continent. And that all was supposedly the empire of Atlantis. Now, Plato wrote that roughly 355 BC. He said it was a 9,000-year-old story when it was first told to his family, which was roughly 600 BC. So it's believed about 9600 BC is when it occurred, according to Plato.
Wow.
Edgar Cayce's story of Atlantis is somewhat similar. Cayce said it started at Gibraltar and it extended all the way across the Atlantic in a series of islands. It was an island empire. There were 5 giant islands that were closer to the Americas, which sort of fits what's in the Caribbean right now. And that the Atlanteans fled a number of places, and it ended around 10,000 BC, according to Cayce. So the two stories are kind of similar in that regard. Plato gave no beginning date for Atlantis. He just said it was an ancient civilization, and that, interestingly, over eons, there are these bodies, heavenly bodies that move around Earth. And from time to time, these heavenly bodies create disasters on Earth. And that Atlantis was caused by one of those, which is remarkable that in 355 BC. Somebody would write that.
Yes.
Cayce says Atlantis started around 210,000 BC. He was very specific with it. And he talked about why and who it was. The Atlanteans, I want to say this immediately. Lots of people love to say that Edgar Cayce said the Atlanteans were the white race. That is not true. Cayce said they were the red race, and that the Native Americans, in particular, those that have Iroquois heritage, were the closest to the true blood of the Atlanteans. So he called them the red race. So that's kind of a thumbnail and a summary of what the two believed, Cayce and Plato.
Fascinating. So I don't even know where to start. This is just so delicious, so delicious. Can we start with the Mound Builders or Aage?
It's up to you folks.
Aage, what do you got?
No, I was just going to mention something that I read many years ago. That the researchers from, I think they were from Spain, they had found some ruins off of the Portugal coast, about probably 150, 200 miles into the Atlantic. They found columns sitting on the ground under the water, and there were buildings down there, and there were ruins, clearly definable ruins.
I think there are several stories in both the Azores and the Canary Islands. There are various structures that are extremely interesting. Not much research has been done with them. You may be referring to a report that came out it first came out about 5 years ago about a pyramid that was underwater, and the Portuguese Navy actually went out and did side scan sonar on it. They don't believe it's a pyramid, but there's a lot of things like this around the world where people will find something and then someone else denies that it's real.
Yeah.
Cayce's idea was that the Azores, the Canaries, and several other areas that are now below the water, and we simply can't see them, were all part of Atlantis. And of course, that's what Plato said too. Yeah.
I totally believe that, because and even on my website, I have a picture of that sonar picture. So it actually looks like a pyramid.
It does. It has the exact shape of a pyramid. I know precisely what you're talking about then. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's somewhere where we've actually talked about going. We were going to go there last year, but got sidetracked on another trip. There's too many places to go. And that's partly why, like I said earlier, that we just quit working with the documentary makers, because they take up time and they don't really explore. They want you to find something and then they'll go along with you after you've already found it. But they don't really explore, and it just burns up all your time and energy.
Yeah, they kind of want to harvest your work more or less and become part of it.
Well, sure, it's understandable, but it's not. It doesn't do what we want to do, which is really find out what's there. Our goal in this was to find out what is really there, and it was stimulated. Our trips to find what was in the Bahamas was stimulated by a book about Atlantis by a British author named Andrew Collins, who's become a very good friend. And in 2002, Andrew spoke at the ARE, the Cayce organization, at which we did also. But Andrew showed two pictures that were taken in 1968 of structures that were found in an area of the Bahamas that no one had ever been able to find again. One of those was said to be a triple ring of standing stones in shallow water off of Andros Island, which is the largest of the Bahamas islands, but it's pretty much deserted. Almost the west side of it is totally deserted. You can't pick up satellite phones. It's in Cuban airspace. There are no boats, no ships that go through there. It's all shallow water, but nobody had ever been able to find this thing. And there was another one from the 1960s called, well, it's an E-shaped formation. Now, I'll do this backwards, I think. And that's the wrong way. An E-shaped formation, like the cursive letter E that was underwater, found by an oceanographer named Dmitry Rybakov in 1968. And so I decided in 2003, what the heck, we can do this. We'll just go find these things. And that really started it. So we chartered a plane. I'm also a pilot, but I didn't fly that because we had to fly into Cuban airspace. And we needed a very slow plane that had 2 engines that could fly low below Cuban radar, which we did. The pilot really wanted to do it. The charter, he said, this is great. He'd never been there. So we flew up and down the coast of Andros, and we eventually found the E, and we got the GPS from the air. And then we found the circle of standing stones, which we got the GPS from the air. Now, I say standing stones because that's what everybody thought it was at that time. This is how we started. And then we found some other circles, some gigantic circles in the same area. It was very difficult getting down there. It's hard to tell people how difficult it is because they think the Bahamas, but this is remote. It is third world. There is nothing there. It is all shallow. Nobody goes over to this area because it's too shallow. We even had to buy and construct a special boat to be able to get into these shallows. But we did get there. We found that the circle of standing stones, when you get to it, it's like a 250-foot perfect circle, pure white in the center. And then it has what looks like a ring of standing stones around the outside and 2 more rings. And we literally had to get right up on them and touch them to find out that they're not standing stones. They were, in fact, sponge.
Wow.
Giant sponge. And they're black. And at low tide, they stick out of the water and they look just like standing stones. So, okay, that started it. And I thought, all right, well, it's natural. At least we've solved that mystery. We then later got to the E, the E-shaped formation. I'll do it backwards. It's hard to do, but it looks like the letter E. We got to it, and it turned out to be natural too. It was a coral reef that had a weird growth of seaweed on it. It's not really seaweed, but I'll call it that. So that was going to be it. I actually told my wife at that time, we're done. We are not going to do any more of this. We've solved 2 big mysteries that are in loads of books. There's no use doing more. And we were leaving the next morning by charter, and a guy came to our room that night. There was a thunderstorm, and word had circulated that we were there. A lot of people were very interested in what we were doing. So this guy had been a dive operator on Andros. He thought we were treasure hunting, which is what everybody does there. And I said no. And I had all these books and charts and papers and photographs. And so he says, well, let me tell you something. I found this structure. He said, nobody has ever written about it or knows about it. And it's off the coast of Andros. And he said, it looks a lot like the Bimini Road, which was this massive structure found off Bimini that was called Atlantis by a lot of people. And he said, but it's bigger. And I said, where is it? And he told me where it was. The next morning, when the sun came up, we literally walked to that area. My wife and I did. And I stupidly snorkeled out about 500 yards into what's called the tongue of the ocean. And it got very deep for a while and then shallow, and then saw this gigantic formation of stones that was very clearly man-made. It had 3 different layers and rows. And I had at that time, we didn't have underwater digital cameras. I had a flash camera. And I took a photo, and I kept taking photos. When we got back, there was only 1 photo on it because it had run out of film. We were using film back then. And I said, well, now we've got to go back. So we did. We went back to that site about 10 times. It got the attention of a lot of geologists and a lot of people. And that's what brought the documentary makers in, because it had tool marks on it. It had all kinds of indications that it was man-made. And that then made us go and do what I did not want to do, and that was get involved with the controversy at Bimini and look at the Bimini Road and the stones there. So we started going there. In addition, the ARE had done this massive satellite project, where they had spent a lot of money getting very clear icono satellite imagery around Bimini, but nobody could go. There was nobody available that would go look at it. So we did it all. We went to all the places. There's a place on a film where there's this perfect circle underwater, and it's real high. It looks like a mound, actually. And in the film, I reached my hand in and I pulled out a brick, and I said, I found this that looks like a brick. We sent it off for testing, and on the film, I said, the brick turned out to be a brick. It was a brick. And we found out that the area was the place where a dredge had gone out and they had dumped some old building materials. So I'm talking about things that weren't Atlantis, that weren't archaeological, most of it, except that one place at Andros. So we started doing a lot of work at Bimini week after week after week, getting more and more advanced equipment, working with archaeologists, geologists, and others who really wanted to go along. And we wound up finding lots and lots of things. There is literally a white marble temple on the bottom, 5 miles north of Bimini, which when we first found it, I was astounded. But when you do research, you find out more. So we found out that in the 1800s, some rich person in Florida had bought a marble temple in Greece and had it deconstructed, put on a ship, and they were going to put it in their outside in their backyard.
That must have been something that was fairly common back then, because there is a monastery down in Miami. It's a monastery. This guy disassembled it and reassembled it in Miami. He had it crated over from Europe.
Yeah. Well, this one was in a ship from the 1800s. A hurricane blew it off 5 miles north of Bimini. So we know that for sure, but it's really impressive. This white marble pediment lays right on the top of it. Well, that's not the last thing that we really found. There was another temple made out of schist, green and blue schist, which is exactly what the oracle at Delphi is made out of, green and blue schist. And we had the schist tested by the top 2 geological labs and universities in the United States. The chairman of the departments were fascinated because it came from Greece. All of the schist came from Greece. Secondly, there is not a ship under this one. It's got columns and beams and slabs. We've put a few pictures out of it. When we found that, the Bahamas pretty much put a stop to it and said, you can't go back there. In the interim, we found an underwater stone building off of Bimini in 30 feet of water. At 100 feet, there is a 1 mile long row of stone structures, 3 rows of them together, uniformly laid out. So you see them on the bottom, then there's white sand between each structure, then another, they're all square and rectangular. There's building blocks on them, and the 100-foot level was the 10,000 BC shoreline at Bimini. So at the time of Edgar Cayce's Atlantis and Plato's Atlantis, this mile-long row of structures would have been right along the shoreline. So our theory or our belief is that in 10,000 BC, what Bimini was in a massive island, roughly 300 miles long, about 200 miles wide, because the sea levels were lower. And it was a port. There is another one of these structures at a place called Cayce in the Bahamas, which is about 15 miles from Cuba. We've been there also. So there's a lot there. A lot of other things I haven't talked about, but it's just incredible how much is there. But archaeologists don't like to talk about it. They deny it. There's been a lot of marble columns found there, and skeptics say, oh, they're all cement. But even in all the publications done by the archaeologists, they say they were marble, fluted marble, and there's pictures of them, loads of pictures of them. So that's kind of a thumbnail of all that.
Well, I'm looking at some of the pictures, and for the life of me, I cannot see why this would not be part of the Atlantis empire, so to speak, because it stretched so long, and it reached all the way to Cuba. Cuba may have been part of Atlantis at one time.
That's what I believe. I believe that the center city of Cuba, which is what everybody really wants to find, and that's why they say it's Thera. Thera is a small island that's circular, and everybody reads Plato's description of the center city, and so they say, "Oh, it must be Plato. That must be Atlantis." But Plato was very specific. The center city of Atlantis, which was about 1.5 to 2 miles in diameter, it was a circular formation that had two rings of canals around it. It went 6 miles south to the sea then in a canal, but it was on an island that was 340 miles long and 240 miles wide, which pretty much fits what Cuba is and was at the end of the last ice age. And Plato also said to the north on this island, there are these massive mountains, which in Cuba, in this area that we have found, there are massive mountains, and there is a whole canal system leading down from these mountains, which Plato also mentioned. So it just fits perfectly. But Cuba has basically been, it's almost like a black hole in American archaeology. When Cuba went communist in the 1940s, everything changed. Everything changed. And there was no archaeology done, and archaeologists weren't allowed to do anything. So we just don't see it. It's a blind spot. So we believe there is an area in Cuba, in the Zapata Peninsula, which was found initially on Google Earth, that fits Plato's center city perfectly. And for the past 5 years, we've been trying to get there. We're getting a little closer, but we need permission from 2 governments, and we need to go into an area that is restricted for a lot of reasons. So we're trying to get the Cuban government to work with us, and right now they're not. And of course, things go up and down there, but we just can't go in. You can take a tour to Cuba, you can do an educational tour, but you can't go down there and get a boat and go into this area and do research. You can't do it, not legally.
Interesting. So, we love labels, and especially right now with a lot of the dynamics that are happening, in spiritual communities, New Age communities, everybody's looking at labels, Pleiadian, Lemurian, and I know your book speaks of, is it Mu or Mu?
Yeah. Mu and Lemuria, same thing. Yes, they're just 2 words for the same place. Mu and Lemuria. Cayce talked about it being in the South Pacific. It's possible that it is the area known as Sundaland, which is a total submerged cultural area with buildings and structures that is off of India's coast. It exists archaeologically. They know that. Cayce's belief was that around 50,000 BC, in fact, he gave us an exact date, 50,722 BC, there was a massive conflagration that essentially sank the main areas of Mu, and a lot of those people that survived went to South America and also up to the western part of America, the far west, like in the Utah, Nevada, part of California area. So that was in 50,000 BC. At the same time, on the Atlantic coast, Cayce said that the islands of Atlantis broke up quite a lot. And at that time, it had some technological advance, but not as much as it got later. But that breakup caused a lot of Atlanteans to flee to places like Egypt and the Gobi Desert and to the Pyrenees Mountains, for example, and other areas around the Mediterranean. And some then went to North America. There was another destruction in 28,000 BC. That's when the Atlanteans had reached, according to Cayce, their highest cultural and technological abilities. If you've ever seen the Disney movies of Atlantis, where you see monsters and creatures, and they made things, which is a term that Cayce used for life forms that were turned into like slaves or workers, or the great crystals that were destructive, the death rays and so on. That would be around the time of 28,000 BC. But there was a big destruction then, and then the last one occurred in 10,000 BC. And then, according to Cayce, the remaining Atlanteans that lived, most of them fled to North America, particularly to the eastern part of North America. Some went to South and Central America, and a few others made it across the Atlantic. But by then, they had established outposts in other areas, like in the Mediterranean. And essentially, Egypt was an outpost of Atlantis initially. That's how it started, according to Cayce.
I know the Basque people in the
Yes.
Pyrenees, they have a very unique language, and some of them have been, I have not met anyone that has said it, but I know some of them say that their language originates from Atlantis.
I do know some have said that. I know there's a lot of, one of the things that there's no way we're going to have time to do this, but back in 2000, actually it was 1999, we wrote about Atlantean DNA, and it had to do with the beginning of mitochondrial DNA and the initial discovery of one called haplogroup X, X as an unknown. And at that time, there were only 4 other types of mitochondrial DNA known. This is an incredible coincidence. When that research was first done, they were testing Native Americans, and they found there were 4 variations of this type of DNA, which is found in all human cells. And so they labeled them A, B, C, D. Makes sense, very simple. And they thought that was going to be it, that they wouldn't find any others. Well, then they found another one in Native Americans. And because they couldn't match it with anything known, they called it X, as in unknown. And today, there are roughly 42 different variations of mitochondrial DNA. X is the only one to this day that they do not know the origin of. It's like wherever it came from is destroyed. Now, you brought up the Basque. The reason I'm saying this, because research was done pulling skeletons out of Basque cemeteries that dated to 8,000 BC, 10,000 years ago. So they pulled skeletons out and tested them, and they were very heavily haplogroup X. Haplogroup X is also found in burial mounds in the Iroquois area. It is found in Egypt. There is a particular group. I'm not sure what you call them. I guess a religious group. I will call them the Druze, because that's the way it's spelled, the Druze. That is not how they pronounce it, but that's how it's spelled. They are most heavily in Lebanon, and the Druze have the highest proportion of haplogroup population of any population in the world, and it's over half. Over half the Druze have haplogroup X. Now, it's very rare. Less than 1% of us have haplogroup X, but in the Druze, it's over 50%. If you go to the Druze's most ancient writings, they claim they came from Atlantis.
Yep.
They claim they are the children of the law of one, which Cayce talked about the Atlanteans splitting into 2 different groups. One was the children of the law of one that believed they were spiritual creatures and that we have some sort of a link to God and the universe and cosmic consciousness, and our purpose is to find our way back spiritually. The other group he called the Sons of Belial or Belial, and he said they were after self-aggrandizement, power, and they were very warlike, and the 2 split. And again, this group, the Druze, believe that they are descendants of the children of the law of one. In fact, they call themselves that. That is the term for their whole belief system. And it's very strange. All of this is very, very strange. And I tell mainstream archaeologists that I know all the time, say what you will about Edgar Cayce. They hate psychics, although a lot of archaeological work is guesswork and intuition, which you might as well call it psychic. As far as I'm concerned, they're no better than any psychics because their hypotheses is just guesswork. But Cayce, Edgar Cayce, either was a remarkable person who could guess correctly years ago, many, many years ago, before anybody knew anything about DNA, or he had some sort of insight into some sort of universal knowledge source, which is what he said. So Edgar Cayce to me is the best documented person who tells us that there really is such a thing as paranormal ability and psychic phenomena that's real. to me. There are other things, of course, but that one is just thoroughly documented. And the organization is filled with PhDs and MDs and various other professionals. There are loads in that organization who believe the same as I do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can I ask you to go out on a limb a little bit?
Sure.
And that is, you're a scientist. You've actually done scientific work. And the bulk of scientific theory is that we rely on facts, just the facts. And it seems like academic science does not allow for these gray areas of what they often refer to as pseudoscience, et cetera, like you just said. So how do you feel? What's your step back for a moment from the scientist? Let's talk about Greg Little a little bit. How do you feel about some of this ethereal stuff, some of this?
Well, first of all, I've published over 300 peer-reviewed journal articles in a variety of scientific journals, everything in experimental psychology to psychopharmacology and physiology. How I feel about it is this: there are subtle energies that loads of psychologists are willing to admit exist. Magnetism, magnetism, the electromagnetic energy spectrum. There are subtle energies everywhere. And we already know that biological organisms are affected by these subtle energies. And I'm very accepting of psychic ability and paranormal phenomena. It doesn't mean I believe everything I'm told, but I know that there are some things that are genuine. Most of people that I would call my colleagues and academics in psychology will accept that and say, yeah, there's a lot we don't know, and there's some strange things that happen that probably have to do with unknown natural laws, unknown biochemistry in the brain, unknown biology that we just don't understand, and we don't understand it all. So I'm willing to look at things with a pretty much open mind. The mainstream, especially in archaeology, they really resent outsiders getting into their field. I am not an archaeologist. Now, I've written an encyclopedia that's used in archaeology and is in thousands of the academic libraries, and loads of archaeologists have them. And so they're willing to let me do that because they don't have the time and the ability to write something like that, which I did. But they don't want people like me, no matter what my credentials and background are, speculating in archaeology. They don't like that. Part of it is archaeology is a field where there's very limited resources, not a lot of money. Grants are highly competitive. And anytime you have limited resources and a lot of competition, things get very nasty. So they resent outsiders writing books. They think everybody's getting rich in this field but them. And it's really not true. Most of the writers and people in this field, probably like yourselves, you're doing this because it's a labor of love. And this is something that I just like doing. I reached a point in my career where I could do it. And I think that's good. I think people should do wherever they feel moved to investigate. And that's what I've done.
Well, that's good to hear that you're willing to go out and explore. That's really a great spirit, to go out and explore and ask these questions and say, what if, and take a look. That's awesome. I totally applaud that.
Well, one of the early things that I did in 1984, my first book was about UFOs, and it was a follow-up to Carl Jung's last book, which he published in 1959. It was called Flying Saucers. Most people don't know that. That was Jung's last book before he died. So I wanted to write a follow-up to that book because I figured nobody understands what Jung said. So I wrote that book, and now in my profession, the people who want to compete in my profession, which my area is criminal psychology and criminal treatment, that's my main area now, they say, well, he's a UFO researcher, which to them means, well, he's a little off. He's crazy. He doesn't, he's a weirdo. But, Carl Jung did it. I know Carl Sagan wrote about UFOs. Lots of people did. I don't see anything wrong with it, nor did my colleagues see anything. But when people want to compete with you, they'll pick anything they can to attack.
Well, the ufology thing has been used as a point of ridicule. And so this whole ridicule factor, which has been spawned by disinfo agents, et cetera, and alphabet soup agencies to discredit or keep people in a mental box where I don't even want to go there because I'll be ridiculed. Or in science, they fear they're going to lose their grants. They're going to jeopardize you and marginalize you
Yeah.
because you decided to ask a few questions that didn't fit inside the box.
Well, Aage mentioned some. It is Aage, right?
Yeah,
Aage?
Auggie's the guy in the red shirt. I'm Tom.
Okay, Aage. Yeah, I know. I'm looking at him up there. Can't tell where I'm looking, though. You're all up here. Aage was talking about some of the pictures. Well, there are several archaeologists that have seen the pictures that we have. Several of them have seen the test results that came from various labs. Some of these archaeologists are good friends. I don't drink, but I'll go out drinking with them. I'll be with them when they drink. I'm great to go when you're drinking because I don't drink and I like having fun. So I'm always the designated driver. But they will say, this is fantastic. You're absolutely correct. There are mainstream archaeologists that will say point blank, secretively, I believe Atlantis existed. There was a hidden, lost civilization. Call it Atlantis or anything else. I believe that there are remnants of it down there in the Bahamas. I believe some of these photos you guys have taken and places you found are part of Atlantis. But there is no way I can ever have my name mentioned with this. And we've even offered to pay them. We usually pay for everything ourselves. I'll pay you to go. I'll pay everything. We'll get the most comfortable boat you've been in to see this stuff. Can't do it. None of them. They say they will lose their academic position. They will never get a grant or a promotion again, nor will they be able to publish in an academic journal. It's unbelievable.
It's kind of sad because the exploratory urge is clipped. I got a question for you, and I'm not an archaeologist. What is on land-based archaeology? How far back can we go with what we found so far? How many thousands of years back does what we have right now?
Anywhere?
Science. I'm sorry?
Anywhere? Of anywhere
in
the world?
Anywhere on the planet. How far back do we know?
Well, you can go back to over 1 million years with the hominids, in Africa, way over 1 million years. Some of them go back to 7 million, which weirdly, Edgar Cayce said back in the 1920s that the first hominids, or the first human-like creatures who were very small, started 10 million years ago. And now mainstream science, back at that time, mainstream science said they were no more than 200,000 to 300,000 years old through evolution. And now it's pushed back to almost it's over 8 to 9 million now, how far back it goes. Now, archaeology in the Americas, it depends on whether you're talking about North America or South America. North American mainstream archaeology tells us the oldest thing is around maybe 17,000 BC. That's mainstream, even though mainstream archaeologists have reported things that go back to 133,000 BC, which occurred just this past year in a journal and had about 15 different archaeologists and geologists sign off on it. That was found in California. In South America, South American archaeologists take it back to 250,000 years ago with human beings there. There is some evidence, though not solid evidence, that's acceptable that Neanderthals were, at least in South America, probably some in North America, but not many. And then there's this weird culture, which is relatively new. I'll call it a culture. It's not. It's a type of proto-human, an extinct branch of humanity called Denisovans that was found 5 years ago in a Russian cave, which translates to the Cave of Denis. So they're called Denisovians or Denisovans for short. And they go back to 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. So that's where we are with all that. The oldest temple so far known in the world is Göbekli Tepe. That is in southeastern Turkey, dates to 10,000 BC. There are lots of places that go before that, though, all over the world. And, of course, European archaeology is way ahead of ours because they've been there longer. And they've dug up everywhere. We haven't, and we're a bigger land.
So through all of your research, I'm sorry, Aage, through all of your research, what has been like the most fascinating thing or experience that you've had?
The most fascinating thing, and we've had some weird experiences, I'll tell you one of them. The most fascinating thing are the absolute blatant lies told by the geologists and archaeologists that did the early work at Bimini. And I'll give you one example. A guy with the U.S. Geological Survey, with the full knowledge of his superiors, he was a geologist for them, and with the full knowledge of a geology department at a university in South Florida, made fake artifacts, stone artifacts, and took them to Bimini and planted them under the stones at the Bimini Road, which planting fake archaeological relics today would be a felony offense, and all done without permission. And he was hoping that somebody would find them and report them so he could make fun of them. So that's the kind of thing. There's loads of examples like that. We had a very strange experience in around Andros. We had chartered this large, we call it a mother boat, which we can live on, but the mother boat can't get into shore, and not really even shore. It can't go into the shallows, which you can go like 5, 10 miles, 20 miles off of some of these islands, and there's areas that are only a foot to 2 feet deep. So you can't bring a big boat in. That's why nobody does this. So we had our own boat, which had a catamaran that had a 1 foot draft that we would take. And it's very fast, pretty comfortable. And so we would tie it up to the mother boat at night. And then during the daytime, we'd take off, explore. And then we were supposed to meet the mother boat at a set location as we moved up the coast of Andros, which is like 130 some miles long. So this one time we were exploring, and we got a little early to the site where we were supposed to meet them. And it was in roughly 25 feet of water. You couldn't see land at all. We dropped anchor to wait on them. And very slowly, there was the wind totally died down. All the clouds were gone. So there's not a cloud in the sky. There's no movement whatsoever on the water. This is the Atlantic Ocean I'm talking about. It looked like a mirror. You cannot see the sky. You cannot see the water. Everything blends together. There's no horizon. It's just bizarre. Well, a couple hours had passed. They were nowhere in sight. We got on the radio. We tried to radio them. We have backups to everything. So we have a big radio that has a big antenna. We radioed them, nothing. We had handheld radios, radioed them, nothing. And we sat there, and it was becoming dark. Slowly but surely it was getting dark. But it was just eerie. It was very strange because you couldn't see. I mean, you can't see anything but your boat. Everything else is a mirror. It's glass. It's strange to describe. Wow. So we were trying to figure out what to do. And I got on the radio and I said, I don't know if you can hear me or not. I said, here's our plan, which we didn't have enough fuel to get all the way to the closest fuel. There's nowhere to refuel there. So I told them we will run out to the middle of the Gulf Stream, which was about 10 miles away, and we'll shut the motor down. And we'll simply drift north up the Gulf Stream, which goes 7 to 8 miles an hour through the night, which would get us close enough to where then in the morning we'd start up, and then we'd figure out where we were with GPS and then try and go get some fuel. So I said that. And so I told my wife, I said, get the camera out, the video. So she did. And she started filming. And the Bahamian with us was agreeing it was a good plan. And I said, well, I really want to film this because we had been finding planes. Some of them had been lost in the Bermuda Triangle. They're on the official list. And so I sat there and I said, all right, if nothing else, I'm going to make a film out of this, out of our disappearance if we don't make it. And the exact words I said, I remember I said, this is how people get lost in the Bermuda Triangle. And then I went on and said a few things about it. And I said, we will put this film canister in a glass container and seal it. But I just want anybody to know where it came from. Wow. I also figured if we're okay, it'll be great. You know, it'd be great because I can use it in a documentary. It'd be great. So about 20 minutes later, just as we were ready to start up, we heard a click on our radio, just a click. And so the Bahamian we were with, he got the binoculars and looked out, and it looked about, well, I couldn't see it at all, but he could see it. And there was a guy above the water waving, like he was standing on the water, waving. Really? And then he started getting higher and higher. He had climbed the mast of the boat that he was on. He was about 40 feet in the air. And he was waving like crazy because they could hear us on their radio, but their radio could not transmit.
Wow.
Very strange. So they were terrified that we were going to leave them and we were going out because they knew they wouldn't be able to find us then. So we get back and I'm thinking, oh, this is great film. We're going to use it on the documentary. And all the film we've ever done, that's the only bit of film that there was nothing on it at all. Nothing. And it's just to this day, I just cannot, because we filmed the horizon and it looks really strange because it just looks like blue. Everything is blue because of the reflection of the sky. And you can't, and then you'd see me and it's just blue, but it's like I'm in a blue room or something and the floor is blue, wow. Everything. But none of it came out. So that was one of the stranger ones. And then on a trip, an 11-hour trip down Andros on a very slow boat that went roughly 7 knots through the night, my wife and I sat on the back, and I actually called her over, and there was thunder showers all around us, but we never got rained on. And I asked her to look in the sky, and then I brought one of the Bahamians back and asked him to look in the sky. And I said, just tell me what you see. And they started saying, there's a red ball. There's a green ball. There's a yellow one, blue one. There were all these balls of light that were forming in the sky that would come on and last for 4 or 5 seconds, and then they would fade away. Wow. Another very strange thing. Those are just
What do you think they were? Can you?
I believe they're plasmas, and when you say the word plasma, people kind of, particularly people into UFOs, think of Philip Klass and the old plasma explanation that everything's plasma. Plasma is not exactly what people think it is. I think plasma has intelligence. There's research that shows that certain electric fields probably do have an intelligence. So it's an electromagnetic field that forms from electrical discharges, and it actually forms itself into a ball because it's electromagnetic. And then they usually start spinning because they are magnetic. And often when they spin, they flatten out almost into a saucer shape. And eventually their energy dissipates and they disappear. But that is a plasma. Earthquake fault lines create them. There are lots of reports on that. I've written a lot about that in a load of books, in UFO books. But that's what I believe they are. But your guess is as good as mine. Do you have a better guess?
No, I don't.
Well, we all saw them, and it occurred probably for 5 straight hours. We kept seeing them. Wow. There are other times you'll get into the water, and the water down there can be so clear and clean. You can literally look straight down 100 feet and see the bottom. Clear. Wow. Other times we'll get into these shallow areas that's 5 feet, and instantly it turns into what looks like milk, just bam, like pure milk all around you. You lift it, it's milk. And that's another phenomenon. It's been seen from the air. It's been a mystery for a long time. It's believed to be caused by calcium being released suddenly by dying plankton, but who knows?
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
I tell you what, let me just take about 45 seconds and tell you a little story. When I was in Indiana decades ago teaching flying down there, I become friends with an airline captain for the old Allegheny Airlines. And he used to fly from Indianapolis, vacationers and stuff down into the Caribbean. And he said that on his way up down there, if it was in the middle of the night and it was dark without a moon up, there is 2 or maybe 3 places that he said that it looked like there was areas of light under the water. Mm-hmm. And there were in between 2 of them, it said there was a string of light that attached to 2 of them.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what that would be, but there looks like there's somebody down there.
Well, if it was in the Caribbean and if it was around, Andros has some top secret naval stations on the East Coast. There's 7 of them. 3 of them are in operation. One of them is called Autek. It's the main site, which I accidentally stumbled into at night in a boat. They came out and met us immediately with machine guns. The guards did. You need to get. And they yelled at us and said, "Get out now, or we will arrest you." There was a stealth ship in it, but it's used to. It was really built to do underwater testing around Cuba, and it goes back to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
And there are cables. I'm not sure that's what it is. There's a lot of very strange stuff around Andros. A lot of very strange stuff. It's a strange island. Areas are off limits, and it's like I said, a lot of it's in Cuban airspace, so you can't even fly over it. It can be dangerous.
This was back in 1975.
Yeah, and that was I think 76 and I think 79. Well, no, 84 is when the last plane was shot down that I heard about by the Cubans that accidentally stumbled into their airspace, but it wasn't worth risking.
Let's migrate a little bit over from Atlantis. Could it be that some of the Atlantean migrated to the United States and ended up being the Mound Builders?
Edgar Cayce said that is the case. The Mound Builders have this haplogroup X. Cayce had 54 readings of his almost 15,000 documented readings, which means every word he said was written down. 50 some of those were about America's Native American cultures, particularly mounds. And he said that, yes, the Mound Builders were influenced by the Atlanteans, as were the pyramid builders in South and Central America. But he said that the ones in the South were more influenced by the Sons of Belial, the ones who were with power and wanting to conquer other people. And he said that's why they did sacrifices there. And the Mound Builders wanted to live a more spiritual and simpler way of life. And that's why they chose to simply build mounds, because they could have built pyramids too. Although some mounds,
the whole law of one thing was all about service to self or service to others.
Yes.
And those Druze that you talked about earlier, they split with the ones that wanted to be service to self, and they went with the service to others. It sounds to me from what you're telling us. Yes,
exactly. Well, that's the difference between the law of one, the Sons of Belial, or the children of the law of one. And Cayce was very specific. Now, Native American mound builders were a very, very spiritual people. They had deeply ingrained beliefs that are exceedingly complex. They did believe we came from the stars. They believed that everything is spiritual, and they believed that we return to the stars. And it really is that simple. They were quite specific about it all. We even know these stars, and it's not just one star. It's kind of like making a plane trip across the ocean. You have to fly somewhere first and get on a plane and then fly across the ocean. Then if you're going somewhere else, you have to make another leg, but it's a multi-leg journey. And it involved the Milky Way. Orion fits into it, and the constellation of Cygnus fits into it. And there are other stars that are also involved in it.
Wow. Fascinating. Totally fascinating, Greg.
Amazing.
This has been a great talk. And we're looking at the chat that we have. Folks in the chat room have been very busy, and they're totally enjoying it. And Nori did a last call for questions for Greg. Maybe anybody else. Oh, there is a guy or woman, Margaret Parker asks, she says, were the Native Americans actually Atlanteans? And I think you kind of addressed that.
Some of them were, according to Cayce, and some of them were from Lemuria or Mu. But Cayce said the North American natives in particular, those of the Iroquois stock, were the closest to pure Atlantean.
Wow. Amazing.
My goodness, this
has been totally informative.
And,
I really
and they're the ones that are haplogroup X, which if you ever want to do a show on genetics and understand all that genetic research, I can do it, but I can't do it in 5 minutes.
I would love to do that.
We'll just make that a point. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That would be great.
Any other questions from the chat room?
There was one earlier.
Oh, she asked another question. She says outright, do you believe that you have found Atlantis?
I believe that we have probably found areas that were Atlantis. Yes, I think that it's about 5 miles due west of Bimini. There is a mile-long area that's 110 feet deep. It is an ancient shoreline. You can actually see the ancient shoreline. and there is a row of roughly 50 buildings. And I say a row, it's 3 rows of 50 buildings, building foundations. They look just like building foundations. They are covered in coral, and you can see some building blocks. I think that was probably a part of the empire of Atlantis. Yes.
Now, one thing we couldn't do because of this time and whatnot, we didn't have enough slides to match all of this. So your books, let's talk about your books for a few minutes.
Okay.
Do you show these kind of diagrams and maps and things and photos in your books?
Oh, yeah. There's one that's, I'll hold it up. You don't have this. This
I
is
do.
called...
Well, I've got the slide for that one, yeah.
Oh, Edgar Cayce's Atlantis. Well, all you can do is buy used ones. But there's, yes, I don't make anything from those, but there's some of those that are available. There's another one called Ancient South America. But if you just look my name up on Amazon, you'll find lots. Gregory L. Little. You'll find lots.
Excellent. So, because now I'm sure many of our listeners are curious at this point. We want to see more. So definitely want to go check out your books. And I noticed we did have a couple of websites that I saw, because I scarfed your bio from another big website.
Okay.
MysteriousAmerica.net. Is that still a valid site?
I think it's .info. Is it Mysterious America? No. Go to apmagazine.info. AP Magazine.
Yeah, we've got that one on there as well.
Yep.
We've got that on the slide.
AP Magazine. Yep.
So that's great.
And I'm on Facebook.
Oh, good.
You are?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Aren't we all?
Yeah.
That's great.
I'm not up to
anything else? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Greg.
No, I'm not up to 5,000 yet, so you can still get on it.
Okay.
I've been on it since August. I came back and I got swamped with too much stuff and got off. But since August, I'm back and I got about 2,400 now, I guess. So there's plenty of room left.
Yeah.
Great.
What is next for you now? You're going on another trip?
Well, we're always going on trips. So yeah. It happens.
That's the peanut gallery.
there's a book coming out in September with Andrew Collins, the British author. It's called Denisovan Origins. It really has an explanation of all of the history of North, South, and Central America in it, an updated history, and goes into all these details. It doesn't talk about Edgar Cayce's Atlantis. It does mention Atlantis, but it gives a very good description of all the up-to-date genetic research. I would recommend people to go to 23andMe, spend a little bit of money, get your genetic research done, but look particularly, as far as I'm concerned, and if I come back on, in the chat room, tell us what your mitochondrial DNA haplogroup is, and we can talk about that a bit. I'm looking for somebody with X. I have yet to find anybody, and I'm haplogroup H.
I don't know what my actual haplogroup name is, but I know that I came from the British Isles. So
there you go.
Yeah,
I'm about 45% British. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
So
they didn't show any native in mine, which we had family legends were that we had some Native American. But
I have a small amount, and I do have a relative in sub-Saharan Africa, which my wife and others delight to point out to me. So I think that's good.
It's amazing.
How do you find out what haplogroup you are? I mean, not typing cross is not going to do that, or
it is. It's not. You go to 23andMe. I suspect that some of the others do it too, but I use them because I really wanted their full genetic report.
Yes.
And it's mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA is what it stands for. And somewhere in that report, they give you your mitochondrial DNA. And when you find it out, you can go to Wikipedia or just put in mtDNA and then whatever your letter is. And your letter might be something like H21A, which it means haplogroup H, a second mutation, a variation. I mean, there's so many, and each one of these has its own place of origin. And you go all the way back to mitochondrial Eve, who goes back to about 200,000 years ago to the original one, which is when Edgar Cayce said Atlantis started with the first true modern humans, which is bizarre. That has only been known a few years that it goes back to 200,000, but Cayce said it in the 20s.
Wow. Well,
Hard to explain.
I'm still equalizing from doing ancestry.com because I was adopted and I found like this huge family, but I will do 23andMe, and maybe we can have another show on genetics.
It is called maternal DNA. You only get it from your mother, and the man passes none of that along, which is pretty much what we're good for. Nothing.
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't think that's true, but okay.
Well, some people do. I'll put it that way. Yeah. That's just a regular joke. Yes, all these guys, haplogroup, their mitochondrial DNA all came from their mother, every bit of it, and I can explain why later. But it's actually a type of bacteria in you, and without that, you wouldn't be alive.
Amazing.
And it's in every cell in your body. And there's trillions and trillions of them in your body.
Wow, fascinating.
I suppose my genetics is almost entirely Viking, because that's where I can trace my family back to about 1400 and some. So that's, wonder where they come from then.
Well, they are probably from the Altai Mountains would be my guess. Again, your haplogroup will show that. I have in my 45% English or British, I think it was like 16% what they called Scandinavian. They just kind of lumped it all together, which I'm not surprised. But, in Scandinavia, we went to Sweden a few years and traveled all over and visited mound sites. There are mounds in Sweden that are absolutely identical to those in the United States. Yeah. Thousands of them, which is just overwhelming. Thousands. And the United States, we probably had at one time 1 million mounds, and today there's maybe 100,000 left. And some of them are very, very large, larger in base than the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is the largest pyramid in the world. It's in Mexico. It's not in Egypt.
Yeah.
Have you been to Cahokia Mound in?
Many times. Yeah. Many
we went
times.
there as kids. It was a school field trip because I grew up in the western part of St. Louis.
And do you know that in the base of Cahokia, they discovered a massive stone structure that is 30 feet high with another 15-foot high stone structure on top of it, and it's about 100 feet long.
Wow. I had no idea.
They found it accidentally when they were drilling straight into the mound horizontally like this to put in pipes to drain water from the top, from the top down. They were going to put a piping system in. The drill bit hit granite, and the drill bit started going through it, and it broke off. So they used another drill bit, and it went through granite. So then they brought in, they drilled down from the top, same thing. Then they brought in ground penetrating radar, and they found it is a stone structure of some kind. It's probably a massive tomb. They don't know because they can't dig into it. It's no longer legal to do that. So even the state can't do it. So another great mystery, Cahokia.
Another mystery, yeah. Absolutely.
Cahokia's mound it has a base of almost 14 acres. And it's 100 feet tall, as big as a 10-story building. It's massive.
Well, even worse is that in that state of Illinois, all that farmland, there used to be other mounds that have been plowed under.
Yep. There were 120 mounds at Cahokia. There's 96 left today. I'm kind of an encyclopedia on those because I wrote the encyclopedia on those. Some of that stuck in my mind, but anyway.
So. Wow. Anybody else got anything else? I think we've kind of hit the wall here.
I look forward to our next conversation with you, Greg. Thank you so much.
Definitely want to do the thing on genetics. That sounds fascinating, and that's right up our alley. Yes, absolutely. So we'll do that. Absolutely.
All right. It's been a pleasure, and you guys will post a permanent link to it so I can direct people to this.
It'll be on our channel here after YouTube gets done thrashing and grinding on it.
Yeah.
So it'll be out there.
Okay.
Let me just put your slide up real quick. You know what? It's worth taking a minute here. We've got a slide of 5 books. We've got Edgar Cayce's Atlantis, the Mound Builders, the Native American Mounds. Let me throw that up here. The Path of Souls, which we didn't even touch on.
No, we didn't get into that.
And then there's a green one, and I can't quite see the green one. What is that one?
Oh, that's the Illustrated Encyclopedia, isn't it?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a 500-page hardback oversized book with tiny print in it. And I think it's 1,000 photographs in it, but I can't
Wow.
recall.
Wow. Okay. Well, great. I'm
All
glad
right.
we were able to put these out there for people because,
All right.
sometimes it's just, you guys are busy doing the research and doing the writing and getting the marketing done. You got no time for that. So if
Yeah,
we can help,
well.
that's what we're here for.
I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm going book shopping. Absolutely.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, I'm going to hit the goodbye button. I want to say thank you to
Thank
all of our
you.
listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
And I'm going to push the button here. And you folks, we'll see you all next week.
All right.
with a brand new show.